Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So before we jump into Emily's letter, I just want to take a moment to reintroduce yet another highly requested guest back onto this podcast. Megan, would you like to reintroduce yourself for everyone?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Megan Brito. I am a team member of Ken's with Ken Reed Counseling. I work with Ken as a coach, and I support individuals who are processing a pretty traumatic breakup off the back of, again, these really what can be really traumatic relationships. I support individuals in helping to heal their own insecure attachment styles. And if you were in a relationship with somebody who struggled with addiction, including things like gambling addictions or sex and pornography or gaming addictions, I can help to provide some context to that, how it can show up in these relationships. And I also can support people in, again, kind of providing some understanding or perspective on how some elements of severely avoidant attachments and relationships can be abusive. So that's some of the work I do with Ken as a coach. And I work full-time as a registered social worker with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. And I provide addiction counseling to folks in my community in rural southwestern Ontario. I do specialize in those behavior addictions. So most of my day at my full-time job providing counseling is mostly for individuals with gambling, sex and pornography, and gaming addictions. And I worked for many years frontline in domestic violence. So having that awareness of how neglect and some of these really avoidant behaviors can become abusive. So that's a little bit about me. Yeah, that's all I have to say about my background with Ken and my job as a social worker as well.
Yeah. And I mean, as I've said a few times before as well, too, I think that you have a very good understanding of these dynamics and also particularly pertaining to addiction, because I think the two often go hand in hand in a lot of these cases, which is why I think having your understanding of it's phenomenal. And I will say one thing I love that you do in previous episodes is also break down the neuroscience of some of these things. We may not have Dr. Sarah Hensley, but we have Dr. Megan Brito in the house to talk about this stuff. All right. Like what happened with the last letter, guys. I'm gonna let Megan read this one, and we'll just chime in as usual and just share our own 2 cents on this too. So without further ado, let's get into Emily's letter.
All right. So for folks that are watching this, if you again see me look down, I'm not like, picking my fingernails over here. I have the letter printed so I can go through it. So if you see me look away, that's why. So we'll get into this. We'll get started. So dear Ken, thank you for reading my letter. I want to tell you that I'm very glad to have found you, as your content has truly helped me. And for the first time, I felt understood. Thank you, Ken. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I know I'm not Ken, so I'm obviously going to let Ken comment, but I do recognize a lot of folks that do come to Ken's page and seek out support from Ken and his team members really do share that this is the first time somebody has been able to validate this really unique experience. This is not, and my clients here may say this too, these are not typical relationships and these are not typical breakups. So I like to phrase it as we really help folks to put language to this experience. So, again, thank you so much for writing your letter. And Ken, I don't know if you wanted to also comment on that as well.
Firstly, Emily, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate that. I don't want to take away from your letter reading other than to simply just say, look, ditto what Megan was saying. And I think that as someone who went through this ages ago, I know what it's like to find someone who at the very least understands these dynamics and can provide language to describe it. Because in a world that's going around saying, if they wanted to, they would, or in your case, if he wanted to, they would, or he's just not that into you, it can be deeply invalidating. And yeah, like I said, don't want to take too much time bathing in that compliment, because whilst I appreciate it, I would love to just obviously make sure that you get your due, because this is obviously all about you and your experience with James. So super keen to get into this with you too. But thank you, Emily. I really appreciate that.
All right, so moving into the body of the letter. I met a man who I will refer to as James in January of 2021. I was out at a sports field exercising, and so was he. He approached me, we talked and exchanged numbers. He called me and we made plans to meet. At that time, I was 21 and he was 30 years old. Our first 3 dates lasted about 3 to 4 hours because I was a student at the time and in the middle of exam preparation during my bachelor, so I had to focus on my studies. I can relate, Emily. I can imagine Ken as well. That just we don't have free time when we're in school.
No.
No. He already finished his master's degree and he was already working. We got along well and always had things to talk about. James mentioned that he would love to spend more time with me once my exams were over. I felt very comfortable around him, so after my exams, I invited him over for dinner. So that's the first paragraph. Did you have any thoughts or comments on it, Ken, or do you want me to read a little bit more of the letter?
Let me just take a look. No, I'm pretty content with everything going on so far. I mean, this to me just reads like it's pretty standard boy meets girl, overshared interests, and there's nothing that I'm like raising any, cautionary fingers over being like, that's a pink flag, that's a warning light. No, like to me, I'm thinking so far so good. And actually, maybe the point I will raise is, isn't it interesting? Because we assume if things would been hunky-dory in this letter, this wouldn't have been sent to us. So isn't it amazing how often it is these innocuous, seemingly great starts that often lead to some very sticky situations? Like when people say, well, how can I learn better? How can I figure this out? It's not easy. Like you can't always pick out someone with attachment insecurities straight off the bat. Unless you've gone through it a few times, you'll pick it up much more quickly. But yeah, based on this letter, I'd say, for Emily, I'm not reading anything here just yet that's giving me any alarm bells.
I was going to say the same thing. You took the words out of my mouth. Reading the first paragraph, this really seems like a standard, as I love you said, boy meets girl relationship. There's nothing unusual that's glaring, and this is something that is really common in relationships with individuals that have really, really insecure attachment woundings, is that it doesn't start out the way that they end. And
No.
whether people you talk, like people in your life that you talk to, or even some content creators will say, well, you should, these are big warning signs to look for on the first date, or, well, you should have seen the red flags. it's right. This is not how these relationships tend to go. And also, what I think is incredibly invalidating and can be really ignorant is when somebody says, well, you should have seen that red flag, because maybe for other people, it's easier for them to see questionable behavior or maybe some unsavory behavior. But if you experience a lot of trauma, or you didn't have, again, safe people helping to guide you and make healthy relationships, that's not something you're going to notice. So also wanted to mention that as well for folks. So if you feel really shamed about, I should have seen this, or someone's trying to shame you with that, take that pause and recognize, if you saw it, either you would have stepped back, or if it's really hard for you, it's not a fault of your own. There's probably some trauma going on. All right. So we'll move on. Next paragraph. He stayed until midnight, and we didn't even notice how late it had gotten. When we said goodbye, James kissed me for the first time, gave me a long hug, and kissed me again. We almost had sex, but I stopped because I wanted to take my time. I was still a virgin, and I wanted to wait until I was sure that this relationship was something serious. From that point on, we saw each other regularly and did different activities together, and also met often at my place. We lived in the same city, just 15 minutes apart. He often stayed over at my place, and he was very affectionate, but also respectful, telling me that we would only be intimate when I felt ready, which I appreciated. Also, I don't hear any glaring red flags from that.
Neither do I.
That is right. Like if I was in that situation, I would also be like, man, this guy's awesome. This, like, he's being respectful. He's not judging me. He's being patient for me. Because again, not everybody's like this, but I tend to see it, I think, more with folks that tend to lead maybe more fearful avoidant. Rushing, can you talk about it too? Rushing is a big sign of trauma, because we don't know when we set a pace and we tend to let things unfold as they do, there's uncertainty in that, and that's having to sit in our own thoughts and feelings. And if that's something, again, you have trauma you're holding on to, that's going to be really hard for you to do. So that's why we can see a lot of rushing in these types of dynamics. So again, I'm going to assume James, again, with this letter, has some type of insecure attachment style. But there was no rushing, and he wasn't rushing you for sex. It sounds like he wasn't rushing to move in, again, those big milestones moving him along. So again, this sounds like a pretty typical, functional relationship up until this point.
Yeah, I will just cut in really quickly just to say that, unless this is the first letter we've got, which is just detailing a secure relationship, I got to tell you, this is kind of a lukewarm start to this entire experience, which is not to say that I was expecting chaos, intensity, you're my soulmate or anything like that, like all the love bombing signs. No, it's just to say that, if anything, take note that some of this behavior is actually reading secure. Like, some of this behavior from James is actually reading reasonable. I'm not getting any of that frenetic energy and the chemistry building. It just seems like he's actually a lovely guy where there's, some shared connection building based on what I'm reading here. There's nothing that is like standing out to me in the realm of like, we are in insecure attacher territory and we should be raising our eyebrows and also possibly our red flags. To me, I'm just like, nah, this is like actually off to a very slow and steady start as well. But something tells me that it's not necessarily going to end this way. So yeah, I'm happy to keep sitting back and listening to what happens for Emily and James.
All right. Sorry. So moving on. About 3 months into our relationship, we hadn't officially talked about what we were, but it felt like we were already together. One day I asked him where we stood, and James replied that we should enjoy the moment and see where things
Oh,
went.
okay, now we're in like now that was quick. That was a quick turn. I'm glad I didn't hold my breath. Okay. Yeah, please keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. It went from, oh, we're gonna go with the flow. That's what he's saying. We're just gonna see what happens. We're gonna go with the flow. It's gonna be great. Everything's fine. Fluffy, floofy, happy relationships. I don't want to get deep. That's what I'm hearing here.
Yes, same.
We continued to meet regularly on days we didn't, we sent each other long voice messages about our day. So I will keep this kind of brief. So with James, he said, I don't want to define this relationship. We're just going to see how things go. Because when we put a label on something like, you are my girlfriend, you're my boyfriend, you're my partner, you're my husband, my wife, that is really saying out loud, I am committing to this relationship. And while it sounds like he's acting in a way, because you felt that, Emily, you felt like there was something really deep going on. Something I'll tell my coaching clients or my therapy clients. It's like when we say it out loud, that's when we feel like it's real. When we verbalize stuff we're holding on to, then it becomes real for us. So for folks like James, when he had to verbalize, I am in a committed relationship and this woman is my girlfriend, that's why he's not, because it's going to really make it seem too real. And people who have avoidant attachment struggle, severe, not all, but really severe, struggle with vulnerability, intimacy, and commitment. So didn't want to speak to that. And then again, even though he didn't want to put a label on anything, there's really close connection. He still wanted to send you long voice messages throughout the day. Him not being face to face with you, I can see why he's sending these long messages, because that threat, quote unquote threat of vulnerability, is diminished, because he's not having to look directly at you into the whites of your eyes and talk to you. So I can also wonder, he's sending these long messages because it doesn't feel so vulnerable, because he's not actually looking at you. That's just my thought. Yeah, what do you think, Ken?
I completely agree. I mean, I think the thing that really just strikes me, as I said, just a minute when I interrupted you, was just to say, like, you know, I find it really jarring that, he's facilitated what seems like a pretty secure sounding, start to a relationship. But then all of a sudden, when you're sort of wanting to know the direction, it's all of a sudden oh, let's go with the flow. Now, I got to tell you, one thing you have mentioned, Emily, is that you're a virgin, at the start of this relationship as well, too. So presumably you haven't probably dated many people. If you have, I mean, that's one thing. But to me, when I hear this makes me think, perhaps, Emily, you haven't had a lot of relationship experience. It's very easy when you're dating someone who presents really well to hear the phrase, oh, let's just go with the flow, and just think, oh, okay, that sounds pretty reasonable, nothing to worry about here. And I think the danger there is that for those that actually haven't been in, around the bush, so to speak, in terms of having a lot of experience, which is no shame to you, Emily, if this is true for you, is to say that you can be very vulnerable to these, seemingly innocuous phrases because, yeah, let's just go with the flow. It seems like, why not? That means I'm not being too pushy. No, I'm not being too needy. This guy obviously just wants to lead in his own way. And I'm like, sure, why not? I've had that happen to me before plenty of times. And I used to think, oh, well, that's great, because it just seems like, we'll do everything on, the guy's time. But as you obviously wisen up to a lot of this stuff, it's very much an avoidant tactic. If you're going to say, I want to go with the flow, you better unpack what that means. Because if the flow is going nowhere, I'm going to opt out now.
Yeah, I'm chuckling, like the flow is going nowhere. It's basically still water. And that's, yeah, it's still water. That's not exciting for anybody.
You're not even going to go into the ocean. You're just going to stay in I wouldn't even call it the river. You're just staying in the creek.
Yeah, or I think of like, you're like at a zoo and you're just looking at the pond and you're like, oh, where are like the sea lions and the whales and orcas? No, they're just hanging out. Like there's nothing going on. I don't know, that was a bad
It's all in
analogy.
and it's in like an enclosure, and the zoo happens to be like kind of like Taronga Zoo here in Sydney. It's got a view of the ocean where everything else is out at sea, and presumably they're having a great time. But you guys, you're stuck in in one of the exhibits.
Yeah, and it's also reeks of like, monkey shit and just, you know, screaming, running children everywhere and probably hot and sweaty. So
But if you're new to the zoo, I tell you what, you often just think, "Oh my God, this is amazing! I'm finally here." And it's like, yeah, for a first time experience, it's a hell of a time to be there. But without wanting to stretch this analogy forever, the point I
yeah,
simply want to make is, hey, first timer, get it. I'm not going to judge and shame you if this is indeed your experience, Emily. But just as a reminder, please, 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 as Sabrina Carpenter says, just be very mindful of the phrase, "Let's go with the flow."
yep. All right. moving on with the letter. One day while walking, I asked James if it bothered him that I was 9 years younger than him. For me, it wasn't an issue, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't a problem for him. He said he had thought about it before and that we were in different phases of life. I was still studying and he had already finished and was working. He also said that he wanted to become a father soon and didn't want me to give up my youth for him. Okay. I told him we could figure things out, especially about kids, and that I would be done with my studies soon, as I am only doing my master's after my bachelor's and would almost be finished with everything in 3 years. And that we would use the time to get to know each other better. He added that he found me very attractive and couldn't understand why I liked him.
Cool.
Then he suddenly mentioned that he would have been doomed if his ex-girlfriends had gotten pregnant, which confused me since he had just said he wanted children. Also, right? Head scratching. Gee, I would also be confused if I heard that, but Ken and I can better articulate why he said that. Because so many people, clients, people come to us sharing their experiences, have this similar thing where their ex-partner or their current partner will say, I want to get married, I want to have kids, or I want to travel with my significant other, do all these XYZ, do all these things. And then when it's time to do that, they go, oh my God, no, I can't do this. Or, they would be doomed. The idea is wonderful. They love the idea, but when we actually have to do things like raising children, you have to sacrifice so much of yourself. You also have to be able to emotionally show up for your children. Like, just be present for them. And you have to cater to their needs. And also you have to, again, I'm not, a co-parenting expert by any stretch of the imagination here. But again, when you have children with your partner, you guys have to talk about stuff. You have to talk about what's going on. And there's so much vulnerability, and there can also be open for maybe disagreements or criticism or feeling like you have failed. So there's a lot of emotionally and vulnerability that comes with child rearing. And again, if the idea sounds great, but having to do it, they don't have those coping skills. They don't. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm on the same page, Megan. Like, to be honest, like for me, I think the thing that immediately made me just like think danger, danger, we need to like reassess this ASAP is him saying, I can't understand why you find me attractive or why you like, sorry, why you like me. To me, I'm
Yep.
glaring self-esteem issue. And for those of you that want to understand why this is a issue related to self-esteem and why you should be very panicky about it, look, I understand we all have varying degrees of self-esteem. I'm not saying that's the issue. My issue is that kind of comment because it suggests to me that self-esteem ain't gonna budge. Like that's a very sort of victim and also hopeless mindset. Like, why would you like me? Like it just sort of implies he's pedestaling you in his own way. He's idolizing you as being somehow better than him. He also probably has thoughts and feelings like, I can't give you what you're looking for. So a phrase like that is already giving me dismissive vibes. Now, whether it turns into a dismissive leaning fearful situation or a dismissive avoidant outright is neither here nor there at this particular stage. But it's very much that sort of, hopeless vibe about, why you'd like me, like, I can't have good things. So, you could easily, if you were to project ahead in the future, I'm already seeing where the signs of self-sabotage are starting to peek through the cracks, so to speak.
Yes, and I think you articulated that very, very well, Ken. And something else that I found really interesting, because he talked about wanting to have kids, but like I'd be doomed if I knew my girlfriend's pregnant. But then just before that, oh, here we go. So Emily was saying he also said that he wanted to become a father soon and didn't want me to give up my youth for him. So, and then again, I know it's kind of in that paragraph, Emily, you talked about you also wanted to have children. So it's not like, again, talking about it, you both were on different pages. You both are on the same page for your future. You both want to be parents. You both want to have children. So you sharing like, this isn't really a problem for me. I'm not worried about it. And he said, well, I don't want you to give up your youth. So he is trying to make excuses for you as to why he doesn't want to have children with you. And it has nothing to do with you or his concerns as a parent. That moves back to, I'm trying to justify not being able to have children, even though I say I want them. It's a weird backhanded way of saying I want them, but I know I can't parent them. So I'm going to try to put that back on Emily. I'm going to try to like make excuses or rationalizations for her. He's trying to speak for you. So
Yes, correct. It's making like unilateral decisions with it as well, too. Yeah.
after that conversation, he drove me home. I assumed that things were over between us, but I had prepared dinner because we had planned to spend the evening together. I asked him if we could have one last meal together, and he said he was glad I asked. We went to my place, and as I was finishing the preparations, he came over, hugged me for a long time, and kissed me. We almost slept together, but instead we cuddled for a while before having dinner. I was confused and thought he had changed his mind. Afterward, I tried to cuddle with him again, but he became distant. The next day, he sent me a message saying he had really enjoyed our time together and it had been intense for him. James said he still wanted to see me. I was happy to hear that, and I hadn't questioned our last conversation again. We continued seeing each other for the next 4 months. During that time, we had sex for the first time, and since then regularly, as I thought he was willing to give us a chance and I felt comfortable around him. Okay, do you have any thoughts on
Yeah, I
those
do.
couple
Um,
paragraphs? Okay.
yeah. So one thing I want to bring up is, Emily, you had assumed that at the end of that conversation regarding certain compatibility issues, regarding age gap, his comments about, why you're going out with him if you don't seemingly find, or sorry, he can't understand why you like him. And about how he would be doomed if he got pregnant because that's what happened with his ex-girlfriends and he didn't want that experience between you. You wrote here that you would assume that things were over between the two of you, yet you still continue to hang out with each other. That's really interesting because the way I read that, it did not imply that that was like a stereotypical avoidant breakup. Like the avoidant breakup is usually much more defined than that. Like to me, I'd say we're not even at that stage. Like the stage I would describe that is like there are signs of what I call stage two withdrawal. Sorry, withdrawal. I'm going back to my stages that I came up with. It was like love bomb, withdraw, detach. To me, that's not a detach part. Like to me, that's a withdrawal for sure, because there's
Yeah.
obviously a bit of distance in that date that you spent together where he was distant with you when you cuddled after dinner. But for me, when I'm reading that, I'm like, it seems like what I'm sensing, and this is the key thing, is confusion. I'm sensing that there's very mixed messaging here. And that goes back to what we were talking about before with Megan, which is he has got a lot of self-esteem issues that are going to get in the way of this relationship. He's also given you this very confusing message about how on one hand, he wants kids, but the idea of having them would also make him doomed, which is very dramatic. So to me, I could understand where that assumption came from, but I wanted to clarify that didn't sound to me like he was done with the relationship. And it seems to have been very confirmed by the fact that you would then go on to spend another 4 months together. And not only that, you were also sleeping together. If this was a true avoidant breakup, you would probably have none of that going on at all. So I'm assuming there was a more definitive end that's yet to come. That's what I'm reading from this thus far.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think I'd echo that. As you were saying, it's not a discard, but there's that ambivalence of,
Yes, yes.
yeah, what's going on here? But you said it really, really well. So we're not like, okay, we're done, breakup. There's just some ambivalence going on. And again, he stayed, you guys ended up sleeping together, and then regularly moving forward for the next 4 months. And you said you felt comfortable around him. So, again, this was, I hear for you, again, no really big red flags going on. I can imagine that you were almost feeling like he was I don't know if testing the waters is the right word, but he was just wishy-washy with things. So yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
completely agree. And I think to me, like, whilst I was going to say it may not have been necessarily red flag city for Emily, I was going to say there are still tons
yeah.
of red flags from his behavior because, it does seem like we're getting some distancing, intensity to contrast it. And also, there's a lot of, there's obviously a lot of progression in that you've had sex for the first time. That became a regular occurrence. He's saying, I want to give us a chance, and you're feeling comfortable around him. I mean, it's definitely not coherent what's going on in terms of like there being a sense of reassurance from James as to whether he wants this or not.
Yes. And if somebody is more secure with their attachment or how they show up in relationships, there's no wishy-washy. So he
No,
would say, I want to have kids and then we'll talk about this. Or I'd like to have kids, but I want to get to know you and have time. There's intention and it's consistent. So that's a big thing I notice is not going on with James. And Ken, you shared it well. There's ambivalence, just he's all over the place. Okay, so moving on. Then one Friday night, we had plans to do something, but I didn't hear from him all day, which was unusual. I thought maybe he was busy at work. As it got late, I messaged him asking if everything was okay and if we would still meet. He called me and told me that he didn't think things were working between us. I was shocked, especially since we had plans to see each other that evening. For the first time, I told him I had feelings for him, and he replied he felt the same. Ooh, we're gonna see how this goes.
yeah.
James, yeah. James said he still wanted to see me, so we met the next day. During our conversation, I asked him why he thought things weren't working out. He said he didn't know and that if he gave me a reason, it would be a lie because he wasn't sure what the reason was. Do you want me to read a little bit more? Do you want to pause here?
Keep going because I think I'm keen to sort of see what the aftermath of some of these
Yeah,
confusions are.
yeah, okay. Afterward, he hugged me tightly and he kissed me, and we almost slept together. But suddenly he became very anxious, sat on the edge of the bed, and told me he wanted to sleep with me, but he couldn't right now. I had never seen such fear in his eyes. He drove me home, saying he needed time to think about us. The next day, he told me it was over, but we could stay friends.
Mm.
Bingo, bingo. What's the grand prize? Trauma and trust issues.
And soon to be an education you didn't ask for. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to be Dr. Emily too by the time this letter is done with. Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. So, yeah, okay. I'm going to finish out this paragraph and maybe we'll touch a bit more on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was over, but so we could still be friends. I didn't want to lose him, so I agreed. He told me that his grandfather was dying, and I told him I would be there for him if he needed to talk. His grandfather passed away a day after James's birthday. I asked how he was doing, and he said death is just a part of life. I
Ugh.
noticed how emotionally distant he became, and though I still wanted to be there for him, I respected his space. On his birthday, I told him how much he meant to me, and he thanked me, saying he was glad we met. Hmm. Ooh, I have thoughts. I have lots of thoughts.
I was gonna say, do you want to do? I just noticed like at the start of the next paragraph. Do you want to continue with that one, and then
Yeah,
we'll share some of our thoughts together?
yeah. Ooh, I mean, it started kind of boring, and first now it's like it's getting a little spicy. It's getting a little
It's getting a little.
zesty over here.
I'm getting some beautiful dismissive flavors. Is what I'm gonna say.
That, yeah, I was gonna say, me too, me too. It's a little zesty. All right. So despite our separation, I could feel that he was pulling away, but I didn't say anything since we agreed that we are only friends now. After 6 months, we ran into each other at the gym. He came up to me and we talked, making plans to meet again. He invited me to dinner and we spent the evening at my place talking. I was surprised. He took my hand and said how much he cared for me. He suddenly asked if we could cuddle. And although we had agreed to just be friends a few months ago, I felt happy because I thought he had changed his mind. We almost slept together again, but he stopped and said he had to go home. I was confused, unable to understand why he kept doing this.
Okay, let's definitely take a pause here. So, I'll get some of my thoughts out of the way. I'm super keen to hear yours, Megan, on this. But yeah, now this is what I was saying before when I was saying to me what happened when Emily was thinking to herself, "Oh, I think this is going to be it. This is our last conversation together." I was like, no, that's not the avoidant discard. Like, by the avoidant discard, I mean, it's like that didn't read to me like it was over by any stretch of the imagination. But now we've gotten to that stage of phase 3 where he's clearly detached. Like, to me, honest, to me, when I was reading this, as Megan was reading it out, I was thinking, yeah, it's classic, right? You know, you spent a really intimate time together. You noticed a lot of fear in his eyes. He's then saying, I need to think about us. And then he's texting you being like, we can't do this, but we can stay friends. It's like, up, there we go. That's
Yeah.
classic, avoidant breakup where he's blindsided you, still wants to maintain the connection, but you can't have the full intimacy because, it'll freak him out. One thing I also want to actually, no, you know what? I'm going to pause there. There are many things that I want to talk about with this, but I just want to stop at that point because, yeah, all I wanted to simply say was this is a classic avoidant breakup piece now. It definitely wasn't what was happening earlier.
I was going to say, I agree. I echo what you said. And I know I could take this and just run away with it. So I'm also going to, you know, just share a couple points as well. Something I am just speculating on. I don't think I have enough information that you provided the letter Emily to like feel like I can make a solid backup to my point. But I wonder if he maybe started to pull away when he admitted that he had feelings for you too. Having to express that vulnerability out loud, yes, to you, but it's more about him admitting it to himself. Usually that is when we can, not for everybody, but that can be a really common, you know, thing to have someone who's severely avoided start to distance when they admit feelings. We talked about, if you guys move in together or you put a label on the relationship, when something is verbalized that there is some type of commitment or feelings, because folks that lean avoidant, regardless if they're dismissive leaning or dismissive leaning, fearful avoidant, they do not do well with emotions. Do not ask them to be vulnerable. That is like asking them to speak Spanish and they don't even know how to say hello in Spanish. Like it's trying to have them do speak a whole other language. You've never played tennis, but we're gonna just like plop you like on an Olympic court and expect you to play with the masters of tennis. That scares the absolute shit out of them because they do not have the coping skills and the emotion regulation skills and the feelings of their own worth and security to be okay with really sharing that. So I wonder if maybe when that little switch went from connected to disconnected,
Mm.
and again, like he hugged you tightly, he kissed you, like it was again like I really want to do this, but there was this ambivalence that started showing up, and it was like, again, he was to protect himself. It's a self-preservation strategy, not saying it's okay, but that's what's going on, where he wants to, but his own nervous system says, absolutely not, this is not safe, we're not doing it, we're not going to be, in this case, physically close or intimate with Emily, no goddamn way. And when was it his father or his grandfather? And then when his grandfather died, he was really emotionally distant. That goes back to avoidance. Again, really, really struggle to sit and be with their emotions and feel things. And especially, I know it's different culturally, but I like North American culture, it's very toxic, but it's encouraging men to not cry, to not show emotions. You have to be strong and resilient. And we recognize that that is destroying the mental health of men. So I wonder, is it cultural and his own attachment wounding is basically shutting down because he got distant. He can't sit with his own feelings of grief around his grandfather dying. And we also see if something big happens with family, if there's a death, that can be just a kill to a relationship. Job loss, death, relationships, we also see them, and with people that are severely avoiding their attachment styles. So
Yep.
So that's all I have to say with that.
Yeah, I was also going to add to what you said about the lack of emotion around the passing of his grandfather. It still seems like he's still quite shut down at that point. It wasn't too long after the breakup as well, too. And it sounds to me like his whole line of death is just part of life. That is such a rationalization. I feel like that is such a way of avoiding deep pain inside of him. And maybe he's not feeling anything at that particular stage. If someone actually said that, with the passing of a funeral, now I want to make it very clear. I'm going to put a little asterisk here and say, not everyone loves their grandparents and their siblings, and they may in fact feel relief when, abusive family members pass away. That's something that is quite common and documented. Other times we may have had very cordial relationships and not be grieving all that much. We'll just be like, yeah, look, I miss them, but I'm not, I'm not tearing for them because I'm psychotic. I'm just not really feeling all that like emotional about it. And of course, there are going to be those hard days where when we've lost someone who we deeply loved as a crucial member of our family when they pass away, it just floors us. And of course, we're just beyond devastated. But this phrase, death is just part of life, it's so detached. It's so detached from what's going on that it's actually screaming depression vibes and hopelessness. And it does make me think back to the window of tolerance model that I used in a reel recently, where I was saying that people who go into their freeze response, specifically referring to avoidant attachers, and saying when you go into a freeze response because you become so stressed out due to your fear of intimacy, you can become depressed, feel depressed. You may already have a lot of depression inside of you, but this is more in terms of like how you're feeling in the moment, right? You may become depressed, hopeless, have a lot of very dark sort of thoughts. You're numb. You're not really able to connect with your own emotions or that of others more than usual. And I think it's very telling that his emotional state is still there around the time of your, after your breakup, Emily, because it suggests to me that, presumably there's been a bit of time between breakup and passing of his grandfather, and he still isn't even able to sit with the grief of his grandfather's passing. And there's still a lot of resistance to just, taking in all of this. Like for a lot of dismissive avoidance, they regulate their emotions very slowly. Like it takes them a long, long time to come out of these states sometimes. And so I do think that, as Megan was saying about his nervous system, from the minute that he started, opening himself up more, and his nervous system said, we're not going here, it just became an act of suppression. His body started to shut down, and he was, activated into that avoidancy. And, I still think he sounds like he's still quite activated.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so that's what I'm hearing too. And Emily, I don't know how much content you've watched regarding Ken, but we talk about, again, when someone who struggles with a really insecure attachment wounding, or really severe attachment wounding, excuse me, when they feel threatened, and it's not because you are threatening or you are abusive or harmful in any way, his body is reliving something that's really traumatic for him, and it has that connection with you that's through that trauma response. I don't think I'm articulating as well as I want to, but previous content that I do with Ken, I'll talk about it a little bit more. But essentially, if we feel stimuli around us in our environment feels threatening or mimics something that was threatening to us at one time, so when we look at it through the attachment lens and folks that lean dismissive, that threat can be around things like emotional intimacy and vulnerability, expressing one's wants and needs, or if they had a loved one that meant a lot to them and they deeply cared about that maybe died or betrayed their trust or they felt let down with, their nervous system holds on to it. Our body will store those memories and those experiences as felt, and that will be disrupted as it sits in our hippocampus and our amygdala. It doesn't go where it's supposed to. And it feels like trauma. So when, for him, as he's shutting down, it's around emotionally intense and vulnerable experiences. And when Ken was talking about, so we have the window of tolerance, if we get angry and heightened, we fight, or if we fawn or we freeze, we will kind of be lower in that. And that example, the polyvagal theory. So if you move into a freeze response, you go into what's called your dorsal vagal. And then for us, if we tend to be, flight or we fight, we move into what's called our ventral system, and we have to find a way. We can call it bottoming out. Sometimes we have to bottom out and move back into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest. So he is probably moving to that dorsal vagal, if we look at it through the polyvagal lens, dorsal vagal, or his freeze response in those safety responses, and he's just detached. He's shut down. Death is a part of life. It sucks, doesn't it? Because he is too overwhelmed to connect with his feelings. I'd like to think of it like, you have like circuits in your house, in your kitchen. You plug in the blender and the toaster oven, and you got the microwave going, and you plug too many things in a circuit, you're going to blow. You're going to have to, it's going to blow a fuse. And you have to go downstairs and turn the breaker back on to get that circuit moving. But if somebody's so shut down, we can't get that breaker back on. So
No.
That's, again, that kind of neurobiological way of looking at it. That's what's going on with him. He's so shut down because emotionally he feels so threatened, even though you or the passing of his grandfather have not done anything technically harmful or abusive or manipulative. His nervous system just can't tell that difference, though. So,
yeah, I've got nothing further to add to that other than just to simply say this is definitely, a sign of just how much he needs a lot of therapy to reconnect with himself. It's definitely like this particular instance at the moment is reading very classic dismissive avoidant at the moment. I'm not getting those fearful feelings at all, but this is very much sort of what I would say. It's definitely in the severe range, but I'd say it's definitely not as intense as I've heard other cases, which again, I want to remind everyone, if we're all drowning, it doesn't matter if it's 2 feet or 9 feet, we're all dying. But just to say that, it's still bad for what's happening to Emily, but it's definitely not got some of those explosive elements, the undiagnosed mental health sort of personality disorder sort of stuff going on that sometimes creeps into these, letters as well too. So far, it's just sounding like very textbook DA sort of stuff.
I would agree. Absolutely. All right. He didn't contact me afterward. And after 5 days, I messaged him saying I had enjoyed our time together. He didn't respond for another 2 weeks. I reached out again, asking if everything was okay and if we could talk. He called me and said that what had happened between us shouldn't have. He admitted that he had been confused after our last meeting and didn't know why it happened. I couldn't understand why he would initiate something again if he knew what I was feeling for him. James said he understood if I didn't want to hear from him for a while and that I could reach out when I was ready to talk again. After 2 months, I contacted him and we started texting and sending voice messages again as friends. A year later, he called me and we met up regularly since then. We went on walks, had deep conversations, and he thanked me for always being there for him. I felt that he was carrying something heavy. I'm going to read the next paragraph because I think it'll tie in.
I agree.
Yeah. One day he invited me to lunch. When he greeted me, he hugged me longer than usual, which made me feel that something was bothering him. During lunch, he told me that he had met someone new, a woman who was 12 years older than me and had 3 years older than him. He had moved in with her after 6 months of dating, and she was now 4 months pregnant with his child.
No.
Oh, oh my God. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. I was shocked and started crying. For folks on Spotify, Ken and I, like, mouth hung open, also shocked faces. Oh boy. Okay. James said
Shocked.
he
For
didn't.
those of you that know the memes, shocked Pikachu face.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was shocked and started crying. I would be crying too, and I would be shocked too, Emily. Again, Jesus God Almighty. James said he didn't want to marry her, but that he needed to focus on his child. Oh, flipping the page here, his child and pregnant girlfriend. He still wanted to keep in touch with me, and though I didn't feel good about it, I agreed because I didn't want to lose him entirely.
Actually, I was
Mic
gonna
drop.
do you want to do the next paragraph as well too? Because I feel like that might round out this.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Later, I asked if he had told his girlfriend about our contact. He said he hadn't, and she didn't know about our past.
Fuck him. Like, no, that's so
Bi-
not okay. Please keep going.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. This is zesty. This is getting zesty. A week later, I apologized for not being able to be happy for him with about the pregnancy the day he told me. I wished him well for his baby, and he responded with a voice message thanking me and reassuring me that everything was fine.
Oh my God.
Really, really, everything was fine. Okay.
But you know what?
Okie dokie.
I'm going to start with that point. What a selfish prick. Like the fact that he, you're wishing him well for the baby, and you've just been fucking used, Emily, by this guy, and you're trying to be, decent, saying, listen, it just doesn't feel great hearing about this, especially, in light of the conversation we've been hearing up until this point. Emily has been told, yeah, I definitely want kids, but my past girlfriends, I would have been doomed if I, had a partner who was pregnant. And now he's rubbing this in her face. I know he's not doing it intentionally. I get that. But it's still shit. The impact is awful. And I find it so selfish of him on so many levels to just to start off with as an example, reassuring you, yeah, everything's fine. It's like, bro, you know, think outside of yourself for a minute. Think about what you're doing and how you're impacting the poor girl. Secondly, you have become his Phantom X. The fact that he reached out to you a year after the fact when he's 6 months into a new relationship, that he's now uncertain about whether he wants to commit to marriage, makes me think, okay, emotionally, he's feeling guilty about leaving his child and also his pregnant wife. And I
Oh
also
no, girlfriend. They're not even married. He does not want to marry her, Ken. I don't mean to interrupt. We got to
good
clarify this.
good point. Good point. Girlfriend. Thank you for clarifying. That was a great interruption. And it's like, gosh, like the audacity of this guy. Again, like, it's I understand before, like a minute ago, I was talking about the spectrum of like how bad this can get. Yeah, this is still fucked up. Like, this is still really bad. Like, when we're at the severe end of avoidant attachment, right? That behavior, it's really traumatic to be on the receiving end of. It doesn't matter how, much the spectrum then gets exacerbated by, other personality flavors too. Like, this guy is just so not okay in what he's doing. He's totally made you his Phantom X. Sorry, when I say he's made you his Phantom X, he didn't craft that in his head,
Yeah.
try and avoid responsibility. This is obviously something that's happened when space was created between you and him when he got into this relationship. And then, of course, he started to miss you and miss all the good times as things are getting more intense with this new girl. But the fact remains, this is fucked up. So, just wanted to start out with that. I've got plenty of other things I want to talk about, but yeah, Megan, what are your thoughts?
It really is. This is so fucked up. Just like, oh, yeah, I have lots of thoughts. Oh my God. So, yes, I would agree. I think you probably, in some capacity, Emily, have entered Phantom X territory. And I think talk about Phantom X's, because I know a lot of people have questions about it. I know I had questions about like what do we look like when these relationships end? Are we a Phantom X? What makes somebody a Phantom X? And usually it's not about like a specific person, but it's the traits and qualities or things that you are able to give them that they couldn't give themselves. So yes, maybe a lot of their ex-partners were abusive or were like really anxious or just a hot mess. If folks that are really dismissive, they do on some level appreciate folks that are able to be emotionally open and available. They do appreciate people that are consistent. They do appreciate people that are okay just being themselves, because they can't do that authentically and they struggle with that. So the traits that you bring, and if again they did really enjoy you, those are some of those things that make you that Phantom X. So recognizing that you were wanting to connect with him, and I for just what I'm reading, nothing is glaringly concerning about the behavior, recognizing you haven't dated a lot, but nothing's really standing out going, ooh, like questions about some of this type of behavior from you, Emily. So I could see why you could be that Phantom X, because you presented consistency and kindness and interest and care. And I wonder what this, his new girlfriend is providing. And also, I wonder if she knows nothing about you. Again, Ken, tell me your thoughts on this, but I wonder if when he was with you, did you also have any knowledge about previous relationships? Like he doesn't talk about his partners. So what were previous relationships when you were together that you didn't know about? I have questions. And again, he's not intentional, but can be malicious. But we can also see folks that can be really avoidant, maybe do those things because they on some level recognize, maybe I wasn't a great person in this relationship. I hold a lot of shame. I don't want to talk about it. Or we can see this more with folks that lean really, really fearful. I mean, some dismissive too, where they'll almost like mold and shape and cherry pick how they want to present their relationship to paint themselves in a better light. But so I have questions about that. And again, he met her, moved in 6 months later, got pregnant. And taking that intensity that he had for you and putting it into this next relationship, and he happened to get this woman pregnant. So it has nothing to do with your worth or your quality in a relationship. I do wonder how functional this woman was. And if she didn't want to go deeper, get to know him, that also probably felt safe for him, and maybe why he moved in 6 months later. They're having a baby a few months after. So yeah. And also, oh, sorry. And then I will say this. I know you said you feel bad that you couldn't be delighted about him, like having his baby. Honestly, I wouldn't be delighted either if I were you. Yes, you guys kind of moved to a space of friendship. This man fucked you over so badly, saying not intentional, but he used you. I would not give a shit about the new partner and that baby. I know that I don't mean to sound crude saying that, because how badly he hurt you and took no accountability for his actions. That's why I said what I said, not because of like a maliciousness, but because he just like swept you under the rug. This woman has no idea about you, and doing all the things you wanted to do with him, right? Have that family get together, and, did that all for another person and can't give you a decent explanation. So yeah, you don't have to be, it's okay that you are not enthralled about him having this baby. Don't feel like you need to be.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with Megan. Like you have no reason to be in any way, shape, or form like gushing tears or sorry, let me change that. You have no reason to necessarily be showering congratulatory messages to James because he's had a baby in light of what he's done to you. I know it's subtle in the realm, like when we think of abusive behavior, what he's done is absolutely abusive, but it's not sort of like what we normally think of as abuse, like say with, your typical, gaslighting, projection, manipulation, physical abuse. It's abusive because he's been misleading. He's, given you no proper sense of closure. He's still tried to keep you involved. He hasn't also been honest with his intentions. And he's also now emotionally cheating on his new partner while keeping you in tenterhooks while he's still in a non-committal relationship with this girl who he's unsure if he wants to be, their wife after being together for 6 months. One other thing I also want to say to you, Emily, as I've been reading this, I know you've said some things like, oh, I didn't want to lose him and I wanted to still keep him in my life. And I have also been very mindful of how I've gone about, responding to him. I know that you, like I've assumed, have come into this relationship probably not with a lot of information, particularly around attachment theory. That's my guess. But I want to give you credit where it's due. You've actually, if this is your first time dating someone like this, you've actually, I think, been more than generous and actually very reasonable. I haven't seen any like explicit protest behaviors where you're like begging, you're being pushy, those typical sort of anxiously attached behaviors that tend to get demonized by people online. And hell, I'm not a big fan of like being on the receiving end of that. I get it. But what I wanted to say was, you're not coming across to me as someone who is behaving unreasonably given the circumstances of what's going on. And I think that you've actually done a bloody good job in light of the situation that's happened. I mean, I think it would be normal for just about anyone who's ignorant of the facts to be feeling like they're swimming in the dark here with this. So, yeah, I truly like, I love the fact that you actually had, the courage to not only declare that you loved him, that you had feelings for him, but also to declare that you weren't open to being congratulatory of his newborn. I mean, it's not born yet, but like, the fact that he's about to be a dad. I love the fact that you just were very honest with that. I think that's a real mark of security. And sure, there may be some things you need to work on, but it's one of those things where this is where it's very dangerous to say to someone you're codependent, because sometimes people aren't actually truly codependent. They're just in a trauma bond. And once they get the information and also process a lot of the emotional stuff, they're not really that codependent to begin with. Like, that's a very loaded term, which I won't get into today. It's more just to say that I think that whilst there will definitely be things you need to think about and work on for future relationships, Emily, you're not giving me glaring, red flags, in terms of your own stuff. I think if anything, I'm just like, no, I think you did very well for yourself.
I want to echo that too. You were very, very secure for so much of this relationship.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I, kind of moving to the next bit, Ken, you did not hesitate to go, what a selfish prick. And we are going to see more selfish prick behavior coming up shortly, folks.
You've read ahead, haven't you?
Oh, I sure have. And I was just like this. Yep. I have lots of things I want to say, but yeah, we'll leave it at selfish prick. So next part here, we kept in touch over the next few months, and James told me that after the baby was born, he wanted to talk about us. Okay. However, when the baby was born, he said that things had been tough because of the sleepless nights, and he wanted to be a free man again.
Oh.
He promised to contact me in 2 to 3 weeks. 3 weeks passed without hearing from him, and when his birthday came, I sent him a message. He didn't reply. A week later, I asked how he was. 4 days later, he said he didn't want any more contact. So I think I've said the word selfish prick enough to last me a while. So I'm going to let you just share your thoughts.
I'm just going to say, fuck him. Like, I'll be very quick because I know we're near the end of the letter. And I'll happily let you finish it. But yeah, I just think it isn't interesting how he keeps moving the goalpost for when to talk about very serious things. At one stage, it's once the baby is born, next minute the baby's born, and it's like, oh, we'll get together and chat about this in 2 to 3 weeks. This is someone who is afraid to actually have those conversations, yet desires it all the same. this is a real great example of internal conflict where part of him
Yes.
desires you and is attracted to you, but another part of him comes in and is freaking the hell out and finds ways to be disgusted and to push you away. This is a man with so much internal conflict. I've got to be completely honest, and this is going to sound harsh. He's not ready to date anyone. Like he
No.
really needs intensive therapy.
No. And also Ken, like not in this paragraph, but earlier in the letter when you guys were sleeping together and he said, I'm confused and I don't know why. Or I I recognize I'm confused and whatever I say as like a response, I know I'm not going to understand why I'm saying this either. So I will say this a lot. It goes back to there's some level of awareness of the behaviors, not excusing it. And again, maybe some of these things are intentional, doesn't mean it's okay. So there is some level of awareness that he is being a selfish prick, being a shit human being to you. This is not okay. So, yep, him saying 4 days later, no more contact. Let's just avoid my discomfort and I'm done. And again, it has nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your quality, nothing to do with what you can or cannot give in a relationship. This is about him and his own insecure attachment woundings, his struggle to be vulnerable, his struggle to be emotionally available. And he's not doing this for this new girlfriend that they now share a child with. I also really want to make that clear.
Yeah,
Okay,
completely
we'll finish
agree.
up the letter. Yeah, okay. He thanked me for always being there for him and told me that his decision was final. Of course, he's also single-handedly deciding the fate of this, relationship you guys had. His
I
decision, it's final. When I asked for a final conversation, he said he couldn't do it face to face. Very cowardly. I'm not going to call him a coward, but it's cowardly. Okay, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to finish reading this and then we'll go into it because now I'm like, oh my God, what Jesus? Oh my God. Okay. So they can do it face to face. 4 days later, he called me and we talked about it for 2 hours. He apologized for how he had treated me and admitted that he had often wondered why he had gotten close to me again. He said that I wasn't the problem. He told me that no one had ever cared for him that much like I did, that he is still attracted to me. I could hear his voice trembling. I ended by telling him that I loved him and wished him all the best and for him and his family. It's been almost 6 months since we last spoke. I was hurt by the way he just threw me out of his life and didn't even say goodbye to me in person. Do you have, I'm sorry, excuse me. Do you have any tips on how I can learn to deal with this in my healing process? Whenever I'm out and I see children or babies, it always reminds me of him and his child. I still think about him every day, and I can't really be angry with him because I don't think he wanted to hurt me. He had also told me that he was very afraid of rejection. How can it be that he has been going back and forth with me for so long, but everything happened so quickly with another woman? Do you think I have an anxious attachment style? What do you think about our age difference that he once mentioned? More of an excuse? Because he knew from day one that there was 9 years between us. Looking back, I could have set more boundaries. Okay, so that's the end of the letter. I know I was kind of starting to talk a little bit. I was getting a little bit fired up. Um, I'll maybe quickly add just a couple of my thoughts here, because I recognize, again, I haven't said the word selfish prick so much in a long time, and I've felt like I've met my quota for all of 2025. Recognize I've been saying that. I'm, not, I say that I'm not trying to villainize him. My goal is not to say this man is like a disgusting, despicable human being, because you said, I don't think he tried to hurt me. This is why I can't be angry at him. I do want to echo that. I also don't think he tried to hurt you. He is hurting himself. Like he is a man in so much pain. He has so much, again, struggles with his own attachment woundings, that and he's not willing to face up to them. That's also not an excuse. That's why I am, I am appalled by this behavior. And it's, even though I spend my time, coaching, hearing about this and helping clients work through it, it's the appalling behaviors, the disappointment from these behaviors doesn't get any lighter, or it doesn't, it's just as impactful every time, because at the end of the day, this is a person who again recognizes that he's struggling in some way. He can't really understand why, but he knows something is off,
Yeah.
and he is not getting any help. He's not. That's why this is not okay.
Yeah.
And you saying, do I have anxious attachment? Hell no. No, no, not at all. You were so secure in so many ways. And folks, even if you are the most secure person in the whole world and you meet somebody that is severely avoidant, it will make you an anxious hot mess. It will just destroy you from the inside out. And you will think you are going crazy. You will think you have this crazy anxious attachment style, and you think you are crazy. And that is what happens when people are inconsistent, neglectful, hot and cold, throw us away like we meant nothing to them, and then hop into a new relationship and do all the things that we wanted to do, or they told us they wanted to do with us. It's, how you feel is appropriate considering how you were treated. So yeah, and he got close because he really he wanted to, but his own trauma stopped him from being able to. So I will shut up about my thoughts on it. Ken, what do you have to say for the rest of this letter?
Yeah, I do have a lot to say. And thank you, by the way, for reading all this out. And also for sharing your thoughts. I'm gonna start out by saying that like Megan was saying, whilst James, I don't think is a maliciously inclined guy, he'd have to know that, there's something not quite right with him. And not to mention, he's actually hurting now two women and a potential offspring, right? A baby is about to come into this world and potentially have a man as a dad who doesn't really want to be there. He's actively said, I want to be a free man. This man is not probably ready to actually be a father in any stretch of the imagination. So you can see the
I
generational trauma just creeping in.
I was gonna say, I didn't mean to cut you off. The baby was born. This baby was already in the world 2 to 3 weeks, and he was having sleepless nights, and he said, I want to be a free man. That's why I called him a selfish prick, or I echoed that. This
Yeah.
baby was already here. And he was like, nah.
And I think that's what's terrible about it. Thank you for the correction, is the fact that to me, when I hear that, it's just like, I don't see him being long or faithful for his relationship with his new family, if you will. And he's already having doubts about marriage. He's already, fantasizing about being single. I mean, if he doesn't abandon his family, he'll probably continue to do more of the same of what he's done to you, Emily, meaning he'll probably find another girl to, connect with. At the start, it'll be an emotional connection, and then it'll probably, go from there to something more physical, or he'll cheat, with someone who he's not particularly into. The point simply is this: his behavior is not okay. Now, you mentioned separately, you wanted some tips on how you can learn to deal with this in your healing process. Okay, so you mentioned, in addition to that, that you're triggered by the sight of babies and children. I could understand that. And to be honest, I don't really have any recommendations, because I can't exactly say, well, just remove all images of children and babies from your life, because that might be impossible. But I do sense that you're probably still feeling upset that you weren't able to have a baby with him, that you might still have these limerent fantasies of what it would have been like to be with James and to still have, a baby with him or have a future with him. So if you're still feeling, and frankly, if you're still feeling like you love him, that's okay. Like, a lot of people still do feel a lot of love for their avoidant ex. My recommendation would actually be to write about it. Do a letter to James that you do not send to him. You just write out on it all the ways in which you wanted to enjoy a future with the guy, because I think it will actually really be quite cathartic for you to just allow yourself to just feel it out and allow yourself to just honor the fact that, maybe this is something you wanted, because clearly those children and babies, on one hand, would probably be quite triggering for a number of reasons, including like the shock of the reminder. But I suspect there's more to it than just that as well, too. The other thing I was also going to say is, I can't really be angry with him because I don't think he wanted to hurt me. Yeah, I hear that a lot from my clients, and this is where I'd say, an easy way to help you access the healthy anger, not rage, healthy anger, is to go back to, but how have his actions made me feel? And to really connect with that hurt that you feel inside of you and be like, did you like that? Did you enjoy how James basically strung you along, was hot and cold, didn't reply to your messages at times, basically was ambivalent about you throughout this entire time, but didn't actually give you a lot of proper coherent clarity and also treated you right, or his new partner right? He's kept you around practically as an option. Did you like how that felt? That's a really easy way to start accessing some of that anger because let me just tell you, I don't care what his background is. We've speculated his mental health is not great. But at the end of the day, your mental health is not an excuse for this kind of behavior. We're all, facing our own mental health challenges. We've got our demons. But, just please don't let that out, in this kind of way, because it's absolutely abusive what he's done. And then I know you, Megan, was saying, actually, before I talk about the anxious attachment piece, there was another question you asked here. So, how can it be that he's been going back and forth with me for so long, but everything happened so quickly with another woman? Because during this time, he has gone through multiple different things internally. He broke up with you in a free state. He started to, feel a bit more, relaxed, probably not as agitated, but then I imagine he probably felt a lot of guilt and shame for his actions, which usually prompts a lot of avoidant attachers, fearful and dismissive, particularly dismissive leaning of fearfuls, to monkey branch to get with someone new, to give them a fresh dopamine hit to make them feel better about things. And also, it's a way of banishing you, right? It's a way of not wanting to acknowledge the past or the feelings that are associated with it because they're too painful. They come up with a lot of shame and guilt and they don't want to feel that. But then when he gets into this new relationship where things are now starting to escalate and things are starting to get real, he's, got a baby on the way, baby's born, he's messaging around that time because now he's starting to freak out with this new partner about the growing intimacy and commitment there. So you're his way out, to feel a sense of space between him and his new partner. And he's got his new partner as a way of creating space between you and him. So no one's winning in this particular stage except for him because he's got control of the intimacy in this relationship. So that's how I can explain it for him. He's being very selfish here, trying to meet his emotional needs in this space when his nervous system is going through all these different phases. Do I think you have an anxious attachment? Okay. I've got a different take to what Megan was saying, which is to say, I don't immediately think you have an anxious attachment, but it couldn't hurt to actually seek a professional out and actually just go through some of the stuff you have here, because usually I often find that there are reasons as to why we get with these sort of people. And it may not mean that you necessarily have an anxiously attached system. It may be that there are other things going on from your family of origin, a whole range of different things. The point simply is, there's not enough information here to immediately make me think you have an anxious attachment. If anything, I think like I said at the beginning, this is more a case of you may not have been educated in this particular scenario, which is why you behave the way that you did. But I don't think that's necessarily enough information to say you have an anxious attachment style. Lastly, age difference. Was that an excuse? Abso-fucking-lutely yes. The whole age excuse thing, I've had that happen to me once when I dated an avoidant attacher. It can absolutely be one of the things they use as a justification to end things between you, but it's not a real thing. The guy still has feelings for you. If he truly thought that the age was an issue, he wouldn't look back. The fact of the matter is that age, it's a consideration for a relationship maybe not being compatible, but it usually won't be the reason for the breakdown. It'll be something more significant like maturity, like different interests and stuff like that. The age is more of it denotes, obviously different, it denotes obviously where you're at a particular life stage, but it doesn't necessarily denote where your emotional age is at. So yeah, that is basically it from me in terms of that. And I know you finish off by saying I could have set more boundaries. I mean, sure. But to be honest, sometimes we have to learn where our boundaries are before we can set them, right? And I'm sure you've learned, a lot of places where you need to set boundaries going forward.
Yeah, I think you said that really, really well. And that remember you were sharing, not quite sure about that attachment style, but what gravitated you to him? that's those things you can explore. I absolutely agree with that. Because we don't just wake up and go, yeah, I'll get into a relationship with this person. He's nice, he's cute. Let's see where things go. Um, what are the things that attract and pull us to have relationships with the people that come into our life? I want to say one more thing, and I don't remember what it was. So yeah, I have nothing else to add to this letter. Emily, thank you so much for writing your letter. Thank you so much for sharing it. It was a pleasure getting to read it with Ken tonight. Yeah, I don't know what the submissions for letter reading looks like. That is Ken. So I don't know if you have anything to share about it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was a joy. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, no, I can only echo what Megan said, which is to say that it was a real joy to read your letter. And what a great letter too, of like describing a dismissive avoidant interaction too, because a lot of the time in my experience, I tend to see a lot more dismissive leaning fearfuls, which is great because hey, that's as Megan and I like to say, that's a bit spicy. It's entertaining and it's also very informative to see like where, even though obviously for a lot of you who listen to this, the patterns are damn similar every time, which is, or actually I wouldn't say similar, the same in all these cases. And I can say that because I've got the proof in the pudding, so to speak. I can just be like, and here's this body of work that you can listen to. But I love the variations because it really demonstrates how different even the dismissives are to even the fearful avoidant attachers as well too, even though we sometimes categorize avoidance as being either fearful or dismissive. It's not quite that simple, and that the disposition, the behavior, the way they show up can be wildly different and have unique spectrums of their own. But putting all that to one side, submissions. So this month of February, we are all booked out of submissions for letters, but we're looking to reopen at the end of the month for March. So keep your ears peeled for that. I will be making an announcement coming into the last week of April, last week of February to talk about that. But for now, I'm not accepting any letters, but I will be back and Megan will be back too to do more letter readings in the future. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much for being here. And yeah, Megan, did you have anything you wanted to close off with before we finish today's episode?
If folks are interested in seeing me for attachment coaching or to help process a breakup, I do have space for clients. I work Mondays and Tuesdays with Ken as a coach. So please feel free to reach out. Check out my booking page. I've also had some questions come up. I also really just want to clarify too. I've had a few people ask if coaching with me is covered under insurance, or because I'm a registered social worker, if they can claim me on insurance. No, you cannot. I am a coach with Ken. You are not seeing me as a social worker, therapist, or counselor. We do not take insurance. So it's kind of full rate, flat rate. But if folks have questions or are interested in coaching, yeah, I have space. I have availability. So that's it.
And you can find Megan's details on my website, which is like plastered in a lot
Yes.
of places across social media. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day where you're at, and we will be back for another letter reading soon.